Hi everybody, I recently watched We Live in Time, Saturday Night, and Piece by Piece, and I want to quickly talk about each one. I didn't feel like it was necessary to make individual videos for each of these three films, considering I don't really have that much to say about them, but I still wanted to talk about them a bit. There are time codes in the description, and I'm not going to do non-spoiler and spoiler sections this time for each of these films. I'll just say very minor spoilers for each one. So the first film I saw was the A24 film We Live in Time. It stars Andrew Garfield and Florence Pugh. This was advertised to me as the best romantic drama of the year, that it made people cry. Everybody seems to be loving this one, and I don't really understand why. I'm going to talk about a very basic way I go about judging movies. If a comedy is funny, it succeeds. If it's not, it fails. If a horror movie is scary, it's good. If it's not, it's bad. Now obviously that is an oversimplification, and I can think of many exceptions, but on the most basic level, We Live in Time didn't work for me because I don't buy the romance, and it's a film about romance. I really didn't understand what Andrew Garfield and Florence Pugh even liked about each other or had in common by the end of the film. It oversimplifies a long and loving relationship to a point where I just felt like they were blank slates for the viewer to cast themselves into the roles. As characters, they had very little personality. I also thought the movie really struggled with its format. The film is told out of order, so they essentially show you different stages of the relationship simultaneously. It's basically a reflection of how we look back on relationships. Memories of it won't be in order, they're more of a non-chronological jumble of emotions you felt. And that's a really nice idea. On paper, but the actual way they ended up structuring the story was incredibly unsatisfying and ineffective for me. There's one scene that really stands out to me where Andrew Garfield and Florence Pugh get into an argument, and it escalates to a point where Andrew Garfield's character decides to just leave the room. That's a bad fight, and I think as a viewer that I'd want to see how they mend it, but we don't. We just cut to the point of the relationship where he proposes to her. These scenes really clash in a way that's frustrating. There are multiple points in the movie like this where we don't get conclusions and resolutions to the conflicts, they're just implied, which is just an unsatisfying way to tell a story. In the movie, Florence Pugh is a passionate chef who ends up competing in an international competition, but they didn't really do much with this character trait. Usually when a character has a personality trait like that, they can use it to display how the character is feeling and where their head is at. Like show fun sequences of the character cooking or running a restaurant. Emotions like dread, anger, joy, sadness, paranoia, stress can be expressed through the filmmaking. But the film doesn't do this. Sometimes she makes good, fancy-looking food, she cooks eggs in a unique way, and that's about it. I understand that the competition itself had an important point in the story, but it felt like it could have been any sort of competition. There was really no purpose to it being a cooking competition. Her chemo and cancer symptoms during the cooking were the only way that they externalized what she was feeling, but this whole aspect felt really unrealistic and insincere to me. There's one sequence at a carnival that was particularly dumb and kind of offensive in terms of how little it was thought out. The film really didn't use the visual medium to its advantage. It's very dialogue heavy, and when the points you're making are exclusively through dialogue, it creates a really dry and boring experience for me. This honestly felt like it would have worked a lot better as a stage or radio play, because the cinematography, setting, production design, sound design, and music choices didn't really feel like they were adding anything to this film. The tone of the film was kind of weird and inconsistent to me as well. A lot of the film is pretty serious and dramatic, but there are some scenes that are pretty over the top and silly, which can work, and I understand the intention, to show relationships' ups and downs, the funny moments, the sad moments, but for whatever reason, it just felt really unfitting for me. I like seeing Andrew Garfield have more fun with his role in these sillier moments, but it feels like the jokes were always at the expense of random people. Some romance films like this really annoy me with how much they insist that the only thing you should care about is the relationship of the two main characters, because these two characters so clearly are not concerned with anyone else in the world. They park their car in the middle of the street, they crash their car into other people's because they're in a rush, they make convenience store workers' lives harder. They don't really seem concerned with anybody except each other, and I don't understand why audiences want to fantasize about themselves in this position, especially because they have no reason to be this inconsiderate. I'm pretty sure these people can afford an ambulance, right? I guess that wouldn't be romantic or something. I'm definitely in the minority when I say I felt this was disingenuous. A lot of people are loving it, maybe you will. Andrew Garfield and Florence Pugh are very good, but otherwise I just really didn't enjoy this very much at all. I'd give We Live in Time 2 out of 5 stars. The next film I saw was Saturday Night, which stars Gabriel LaBelle, who was also the star of The Fabelmans. It's interesting to see that I guess this guy has a niche, because I feel pretty similarly about both of these films. They both seem so cheesy and egotistical and Oscar baity in terms of the way they present their topic. Although in the case of Steven Spielberg, I feel like it's a little more justified to treat him like a genius with his biopic. With SNL, I really don't know anyone who thinks the concept itself is really that ingenious. I know a lot of people who think particular comedians were genius themselves. Like, I adore Norm Macdonald, and some of his Weekend Update stuff is absolutely hilarious to me.
It was revealed this week that defense lawyer Johnny Cochran once abused his first wife. In his defense, Cochran said, "Hey, at least I didn't kill her like some people I know."
But the show itself seems pretty inconsistent to me, almost subjectively so. Sometimes it's funny, a lot of the times it's not. Sometimes it feels like they choose genuinely funny guests. Sometimes it feels like they just choose people because they're famous. Sometimes they commit obvious plagiarism against small creators. Sometimes they essentially sabotage their hosts or actors by giving them bad material. Sometimes they fire people for really petty reasons. I don't really care about SNL, but even if this film was about a subject that I had more respect and interest in, like Steven Spielberg, I'd still find the presentation annoying in terms of how up its own ass it was. It also doesn't help that this movie is pretty inaccurate. From what I've researched, some of the most outrageous moments were true, but a lot of them were dramatized in this movie to such a ridiculous degree that you don't really buy it. It takes events over the course of about a year and crams them into like 2 hours and cranks the drama from 1 to 100. I haven't seen that many Jason Reitman films. The ones I know people say are his best are blind spots for me, but from what I have seen, I don't really feel like this director brings much personality to his projects. This film's personality just felt like a less purposeful and interesting recreation of Birdman, and because of that, I just wanted to watch that movie instead the whole time. A lot of the impressions were really good, and I do like a lot of these actors. I'm a big fan of Jim Henson and George Carlin as well, but I didn't really see any substance to their inclusion in this film. They were just one-dimensional caricatures. People think of Jim Henson as family-friendly.
Any last request, like for a cup of Wilkins coffee? No. You don't drink Wilkins? No. How shocking.
And everybody knows that he loves puppets, so offstage he talks about his puppets as if they're people and struggles to say swears. Everybody knew that George Carlin didn't have a filter and wasn't a people person.
You wouldn't know it from some of the things I've said over the years, but I like people.
And called out bullshit, especially with religion. He would totally just argue instantly and be impolite with religious people, right? So they have him own an evangelical religious lady who's trying to censor the show. It doesn't help that these are very clearly inaccurate caricatures, but what's even the point? For me to point at the screen and yell, "I know what that is"? There's just no substance to any of these caricatures. It's not quite as cheesy as The Fabelmans, but it also doesn't have the very occasional highs that movie has, so I'm gonna give Saturday Night another 2 out of 5 stars. Finally, let's talk about Piece by Piece. This movie is essentially presented as Pharrell Williams telling his life story to an interviewer, and they animate what he says with Lego. I went into this feeling pretty cynical. I expected there to be a lot of product placement. I expected the Lego animation to be a lot cheaper looking than the other 3 Lego movies. I expected the Lego gimmick was going to be kind of pointless. I also expected that this movie would not actually look at Pharrell's life in any meaningful way, considering, you know, it's a Lego movie and it's PG, and it would just sort of be a puff piece for a big celebrity. And all of those cynical expectations were proven 100% correct, but I still enjoyed it. While it was definitely very flawed, it was still a lot of fun. There were definitely aspects to his story that the movie had to basically gloss over because it's PG, but it often did it in really self-aware ways that were kind of funny. The low point of the movie definitely suffered from the PG rating though. They had to be so vague with what he's talking about, and so it basically just feels like part of the movie is missing. The animation looked good and added a lot to the experience for me. The art direction definitely isn't as good as something like the actual Lego movie, but it's still good. Yes, the gimmick has basically no purpose to the story, but whatever, it's fun. The sequences where they animate Pharrell's synesthesia definitely had the most purpose behind them. There's not really any purpose to it being Lego, but that's absolutely fine. It's very much a soundtrack movie, and yay, they play the 2 songs that feature Pharrell that I actually like. I'm not really that big of a fan of his music. Happy is the worst song in the entire universe when you're in a bad mood. Blurred Lines just makes me feel uncomfortable, and the way that he and Robin Thicke handled the controversy around the plagiarism allegations is absolutely embarrassing. Not as embarrassing though as his film scores with Hans Zimmer.
He lied to me, he shot at me, he hates on me, he's using me.
But all that aside, the soundtrack for this movie was still really good. I like the Willy Wonka inclusion. Clearly his life wasn't interesting enough to fill an entire movie, but they were able to fill it with other stuff that was fun. One more very important thing I have to mention is that there is a scene in this movie where they talk about the 2020 George Floyd protests, and they animated it with Lego like the rest of the movie. It was unbelievably inappropriate. This article says, the scenes are done in black and white, highlighting the seriousness of the topic. That might be the funniest sentence I have ever read in my life. My God. They even animated a Martin Luther King speech in the movie with Lego. The narration from Pharrell on the issue is so childlike and surface level, which may just be so children watching the movie can have the issue explained to them in simple terms, but Pharrell's narration is literally like, in 2020, I began to realize that black people aren't always treated the same in America. Okay, maybe it wasn't literally that bad, but it was really bad. It was unbelievable. I lost my mind. Anyways, this movie is obviously very flawed, but it's also a good time. I would be quite down to rewatch it at some point. I'd give it a 3 out of 5 stars, and that's all I have to say about these 3 movies. Thank you for watching. All comments and ratings are very much appreciated. See ya!